All right, so welcome to Local Sightings 2020. I am Rana Sun and I'm the Artistic Director at Northwest Film Forum, and I'm so excited today to be joined by Danny Denial, the creative, brilliant mind behind CONDiTiONER, and S.B. Edwards, director of the awesome feature-length film Fall Back Down. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, very much.
Let's see. One of the things that I really enjoyed in both of your films, and there were many, many, many things, but one of the things that really sunk in, over time, and I've actually watched both of them multiple times now during the festival and before the festival. I love that they're not trying to be any particular thing, if that makes sense. There's like a deep authenticity in the way that stories are told. And especially in the sort of multiplicity of identities that they take on. And SB, with yours, with Fall Back Down, you really had me in how you first presented the work to us. Genre, activist rom-com, purpose, antidote to tragedy porn. And I was like, what? Yes.
Awesome.
I'm so glad to know someone read that. Like you just send things out, you're like, And
I think your director's statement was just, let's burn, with like 2 little fire emojis. And I was like, I don't know you and I need to know you. And I love your work. So I'll start with you. If you could, actually, first, let's do introductions. I'm so sorry. Danny, is there anything else you'd want to say as we dive into the conversation that folks should know about you? Same for SB, and then I'll dive into my question.
Okay.
No, I'm just really excited to do this and then be in the future of virtual festivaling.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah, I'm really digging the virtual festival side of things because I feel like the people that I made the film for and people who I like it are kind of everywhere, and it's really great to be able to kind of try and usher people towards a way to view it, and the fact that you guys have pay what you can is really amazing and appreciated. Yeah, I think all I would say is that I'm a writer, director, producer in that order, and I have a whole arsenal of projects that are very values-based. And so this is what I hope will be, Fall Back Down is sort of like a kind of signature dream, wish to make more content like it. Essentially, I really just do scripted, and it's a tough gig, and I'm just really happy that I have something to show to the world.
Awesome. Okay, so now I'm going to have you expand for us on the activist rom-com antidote to tragedy porn. I really can't say that enough. It just brings me so much joy. Yeah, tell us how. Oh, sorry. Tell us how you set out to make this film and how essentially you accomplished it. What moved you to tell this particular story?
So I was trying to make Fall Back Down for over 10 years. It was more ahead of its time at the start, but that's okay. And I just really wanted to make something that was populated with the ideas and the kind of thinking and the values of my, the communities I was part of, and these people that I so admired in my teens, and I started off in the fine arts. And I was always sort of quite politicized in different ways. And I just felt like these were the real nobility. These were the people, and I was never seeing them on mainstream. I was never seeing us on mainstream anything, and maybe in the music industry, obviously, but I wanted to tell these stories with moving pictures. And so I think it really just came to sticking to those guns. The project initially maybe was going to be a higher budget, but then what they say about being a female filmmaker is true. It's just not going to happen, and then your expectations come down and down, and I ended up doing it for low budget. But that actually also gave me a lot of freedom. There was nobody interfering. And so I'm really proud that as much as it like almost killed me, I love the film. Like, I feel like it's separate from me. Like, this thing came out that is authentic, and I recognize the people in it, even though it's like a composite of all sorts of things. And even like the humor, I wanted to not explain anything, or I just wanted it to be free. And so I tried to, like, anytime I'd find myself reining it in, I would just think, like, what does this scene want to be? What would happen if things were like, if all things were possible?
I love
And
that.
that becomes I think that becomes the antidote to tragedy porn, because you look around and festivals are just full of misery, and watching, I guess people are sort of feel better, or they learn a lesson, but I'm like, we're here having a fucking great time. Like, it's good over here. It's like, there's so much love, and it's so fun. And I just that's what really interested me in conveying.
I love it. The having fun and getting shit done.
Trying.
Yeah. And for you, Danny, this is not the first visual album that you've made, although past works of yours that I've seen have looked really starkly distinct in comparison. Do you feel like, how has your aesthetic changed, for one, and evolved from one to the next? And also, do you feel like the stories that you're telling have shifted or changed at all? And what brought you to tell the story of CONDiTiONER specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I was feeling kind of, basically I wanted to make a short film on its own, but I also wanted to make another visual album. So I sort of took this kind of strange by route where I made a film where the album could kind of be its soundtrack and it's less guided by the music. And similar to what SB just said, I felt like I wanted to just make something that didn't have to follow a script, as in like following the songs or kind of be beholden to them, and just let scenes play out organically and just kind of let a story unfold. And I knew I wanted it to be really cerebral and really heady and really introspective. And I knew from the get-go that I just really wanted to play with color. Because like you said, the looks and the aesthetics have always been very monochromatic, very desaturated, just very stark and dark. So the idea of playing with color, which I've really never done before, was exciting. But with that came a lot of fear of just being in a lane that I don't usually occupy. So letting go was a big part of that. To echo what you had said, just doing what I had a script, but still doing what felt right scene to scene, and not necessarily following it, or not necessarily having to do something that fit the confines of what the visual album needed. I wanted it to just be its own animal. So yeah, it was just sort of like getting a bunch of paint cans and just opening them up and just rolling around basically, and hoping that it all fit together in the editing room.
That's great. It was so visually lush with those colors that it was like, yeah, it was a total transportation.
Thank you. That means a lot, because I colored it. So I felt like that was the biggest thing for me that I felt the proudest of. Was I just loved that I got the color that I wanted. I just got the textures, and without going too far, I've always been really just influenced by Gregor Rocky's work, just every movie he's ever done, but specifically the films in the middle part of his career, where every movie just had these insane technicolor, just every scene was filled with it, from set design to hair to makeup to post work. So I was very inspired by that.
So both of your films clearly have a very particular aesthetic. And given your own personal relationships and involvement with the queer punk activist community, I'm curious, are there any real stories that were sparks for something that made it into your films? Any real encounters or things that like sort of, became infused into into these stories that you told? Danny, I saw you smile.
Definitely. I'm gonna let you go first though. Okay, you were smiling too, so.
I was happy that I could think of something because I was like, no, I think there's like, I would actually say there's probably a lot that are, no one's like a particular exact person or exact thing, but I'd imagine, you know, that if I thought it through, there's various lines that can be drawn to people. But there's one thing I put in, it's a little bit obscure, but in the when Nick tries to get a job in the sweatshop and he's talking to Marv, and he says, you know, I'll give you 110%, and then Marv goes, you know, there's no such thing as 110%, ask Neil LaBute. And that was actually like my one little kind of writer indulgence, because I had interviewed for a TV show with Neil LaBute, and he's very cool, and he's like, and I was, you know, obviously a bit nervous, and things had sort of gone well, and that at a point, because I am kind of a workhorse, like that is one thing that I do is work hard, and I said to him something like, you know, about 110%, and I don't think he knew what it was doing to me, but he sort of like went on this diatribe about how there's like no such thing as 110%, and like, why do people, it's like, it's math, and I was just like getting like smaller, like trying to take it back, and you know, just like so many, and I felt like Costanza in like Seinfeld. I was just like, and then I didn't get the gig, and I was like, it was the 110%, like that's what, because you know, I don't know if you guys are overthinkers, but sometimes when stuff happens, you're like break it apart in a weird way. So I've always slightly obsessed about like the move of the 110%. So I did put that in. It's just like a throwaway line, but that's really a pointed joke.
I love it. I love the insider knowledge. How about you, Danny?
Totally. I mean, more or less, like almost everything I do is just filled with this stuff that's just from real life. A lot of times, in film anyway, just a lot of times because you get a lot of organic stuff on screen without spending as much money or any money. So I use my real friends, I use real bands, I use real everything. So for CONDiTiONER, Natasha and Charlie, who played Viv and Ross, were two of my best friends. And we've always been like the trio. People would call us the Seattle Thruple. So it was a running joke. So, and you know, and yeah, a lot of the kind of compounding feelings of that kind of train crash of emotions and identity and all of that kind of colliding on itself, like definitely came from a very like diary-like place. And New Year's Eve has always been something where something always happens that's just so cataclysmic on New Year's Eve. So the idea that it's New Year's Eve and the character is just so kind of out of body that they don't even realize it, and then everything starts to fall into place. Just felt like, you know, a Frankenstein version of so many events that were all very real. But mostly it's the people. I mean, everyone that I employed, all essentially they played versions of themselves. So the idea of like Viv Vicious, if you know Natasha Lumba, who plays her character in the band Razor Clam, she is that character. Like she just walks in a room and it's like, I have arrived. These are my real outfits. And I just thought, that's great. Put that on the screen. Even her ex-girlfriend, who has the Cinderella sequence, is her bandmate in Razor Clam, Aya, and she's just awesome. And yeah, everyone basically. I take the parts of them that I really want to get on screen, and then I turn it into a fictionalized version. And then I just pretend like I created that. So, yeah, it's all real.
Brilliant. Well, I guess on the topic of who you choose to work with, you know, both of your productions took inspiration from and were brought to life with the talent of many BIPOC and female identifying folks. And those are voices that are historically severely underrepresented in moving image media, as we know. I'd love if you could speak to your personal approach and the decisions in how you make decisions around who you work with and the considerations that inform the makeup of your cast and crew, especially for these particular projects.
Should I start?
Go for it.
Okay. Well, I'm like a raging feminist, so I definitely had strong, really strong ideas on this.
Yeah, don't say.
Yeah, and now I'm really happy that this term, intersectional feminism exists, because I feel like it's a much more comfortable and much more comfortable sort of moniker. But I knew that I wanted, and it was super important to be inclusive in all aspects. I will say that the production was so low budget and so ambitious that it put a lot of duress on all the people. And I have to give everyone so many props, because it was just incredible the amount of energy that was rallied to make all these things happen that came into it. And none of it was easy. Like nothing, not one prop was easy. So just in the sense that we had no prep, we had no time. We were like, half the time I would get to a location and I had never even seen it really. I'd seen some photos. So I was like trying to block while the actors were getting, their wardrobe, and it was really full on. So in prep, which was really short, I was surprised, because I had been so sort of clear that I wanted representation and parity. And then people it's hard, like, because there's so many, we were just instantly full of guys. Like everybody had, it was so easy because they're experienced and they're there and they're ready. And at a point I did like a hiring freeze, because I'm like, I can't be proud of this if this keeps everything fills up this way. And I'm like, those guys are great, but I just wanted to hold some space. And then we put a post on Facebook in a couple of the groups here, and got like so much hate. People were like, that's discriminate, just the classic, right? Like, that's discrimination. And they don't even know the story that there's, they don't even know, they're just reacting to the post, and they're going to sue us. We're just like, okay. And anyway, you'll be fine. Like, whoever you are, don't worry. We're like, you'll be okay without this project. But anyway, much to some, it was kind of a hard thing to ask us, because we needed to hire. And then I kept saying like, I need to find somebody in this, I need to find a certain type of person, so we have this representation, which is more looking, less time. But anyway, eventually it all worked out, and we just, it is a bit tougher. So I'm happy that people are, this conversation's happening. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's hard to get, I think, the things that you want to see on the screen from a logistical standpoint. It's really hard to make it line up that way sometimes. And quite honestly, like for me, it really wasn't something I used to really think about a few years ago. Like it was just kind of, well, I mean, luckily, like I'm a person of color, and I have all these things. So I just happen to pull from and around things that are like me. And, and I think in a lot of ways, doing it without really thinking about it, which is fine in some ways, because I still have my work often has a lot of diversity, but I think intention is really important too. So I think more recently, honestly, especially through music, I've just learned how much power there is in representation and people seeing themselves reflected back. I think that's just huge, because media is inundated with things that we just, as people who are other, just don't connect with, and just kind of keep compartmentalizing and keep kind of sort of getting that shoved down without realizing it. So for me, there's definitely this sort of hybrid of having that intention there, of wanting to have just work that includes and showcases just talent, of color, talent that's, female, non-binary, trans, of all kinds of people. And then there's a little bit of also just people in my life who already kind of are in all of these categories that I think are amazing and that I want to like kind of uplift more. So right now, I think I'm definitely in a place where I'm looking at things with a little bit more of a communal kind of eye of people that I think really should be seen more, who haven't been seen as much as their white or male counterparts. So I just kind of feel like if I have a platform that I want to help kind of like further that signal. So casting kind of comes into play there for me. And yeah, I think the intention is just the biggest part, even if it doesn't always line up the way you want, because logistically, like, you had, let's say, all these actors, and sometimes people just fall through and people just don't, like, it always happens and your vision kind of starts to fall apart. And then when you're in that, like, in that grain of like up against a wall, sometimes you end up, getting employed where you're like, wait a minute, you employ all these people and you're like, why is this crew so male dominated? Why is it mostly white? Like, what's going on? And I've definitely been there before, where I'm just, both in music and in film, where I'm like, I feel like I'm just surrounded by people who don't understand me. How did I get here? But I'm so desperate to get like it done, because it's hard when you're on this level. So it takes a lot of work is the short answer.
Makes sense, and it pays off. I'm so excited that you're both making work that is getting out into the world. That warms my heart.
It does, but I think there's something to be said where, like, especially when you're making your first projects and you're so beholden to so many people and things, and you're working with the least, it's really, really hard. So I think that I know people who have nothing and are fighting with that intention, and I think they don't get enough credit for it, because it's really hard to stay ethical when you're starting at the bottom. So I think that should be okay.
Yeah, thank you for calling that out. I'm curious then, within your work and your choice to, Danny, your work sort of, it falls in the narrative, spectrum, but also like is very experimental, and also like sort of observational, and, a document of like your daily, your interactions and your community, and like where you've been and where you are in any given moment. And so it's a little bit of everything in those ways, but I'm curious, like specifically when choosing to tell a narrative story, what draws you to that format as the tool for you?
Versus like a docu, or
versus any other format that you might choose.
Yeah, I just really love narrative. I love crafting stories, and I love storylines. And when I was younger, I actually always thought I was gonna be a television writer. That was kind of always the idea, and I would just sit there and like plot, like they have these things on TV called like series Bibles. So I would just like create my own series and create like an entire, this is going to be the first season, this is going to be the second season, and in season 3, like, then they all die, and then here's the huge twist. Like, my mind was always geared that way. So
do these exist? Have you shot them?
I have actually, no, I haven't shot them. I lived in LA for a period of time, and I would just constantly be trying to network with like lit agents, and I worked in a few like big bottom level, like television studios. And I was just like, for a few years, I was just like very adamant on like breaking into TV. But it is one of the most, if you think filmmaking is bad, is like TV is just like, if you aren't someone's son or daughter or in the USC program as the showrunner of blank, it's just like you could try for ever and ever. And I didn't, but I saw that was the trajectory, and I said, okay, no, I'm just gonna get out of here and move to Seattle. But I've just loved that like long form narrative storytelling, and film is great because you can sort of just you can drop into a version of it. And the great thing is you can begin and end a story I find that with my films, I'm always it's always expanding into like some kind of universe or something. If I let it sit for too long, it'll just turn into like an ongoing web series, or that's that's the predicament right now. Actually, I did a feature film 3 years ago, and of course in quarantine I'm like, it'd be really great if it was a web series where the characters are still doing this stuff 3 years later. That's what I should do.
It's
So
inspirational. I love it.
yeah, I've got to make it narrative. I think I love the art form of documentary filmmaking, but it's never quite been my medium. I just love drawing from real life elements, and I'd rather, maybe it's because I'm a control freak, so I can't control reality enough, if I was to follow around a subject, but take elements of it and incorporate into a story, and that's my jam.
Cool. How about you, SB?
I got so engrossed in that answer, and I kind of think I forgot the question, but you can remind me what it is. And I did want to riff off of something Danny just said.
Oh, please do that. Yeah.
Okay, because I think for me, everything is kind of tough, when you are observant and you are a bit, maybe overly sensitive. And what's great about writing is that you decide. It's very powerful. Probably how you get the disease of not stopping when when you probably should. There's various writers, who'll say if you can do anything else, do it, because it's. But yeah, it's I actually don't really do factual and lifestyle, because I'm I already have that in front of me, and I'm excited about the possibility of more wish fulfillment. The stuff I'm writing is usually kind of these outsider underdog characters, and I usually write them to win, so they come out, it's like a vicarious, it's a vicarious way of getting the outcome that I feel is really hard to always find in the actual disappointing world.
I love it. Well, thank you for drawing us into your worlds. Okay, I'm going to open it up so you two can pose the burning questions that you have for each other. And then if our audience has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Or I think if you're joined on the Zooms, you can raise your hand and we can call on you and hear your beautiful voice. So, but I'll leave it to you two first, Danny and SB, to
on this note, then I guess of talking about narrative and talking about, I guess, the freedom of the way the story can twist and churn. I felt in some parts of Fall Back Down, I felt like it almost had kind of an not episodic feel, but just the way the story beats would kind of always catch you off guard, and and you kind of dipped into a couple different genres in moments, which was really cool. There were moments where it was starting to feel like a thriller horror, moments where it was, that kind of activist romantic comedy, moments where it was kind of fantastical, and that Bollywood sequence was just, it really kind of moved and ebbed and flowed in so many different ways. I'm curious if this character, this journey that you plot in the film, was it always in this medium or format, or did you toy with the idea of in moments I thought, well, this could even be broken up as a web series, in parts. Was it always a feature film?
It was, because starting so long ago with it, I agree. I would love nothing more than for it to become a TV series or something, because I want to spend so much time with all the characters, and I felt that I actually already had to cut things down a bit more than I wanted to with the budget shrinking. So there had been a little more going on just, in the other one. And then it really seemed right to just bring it more down to these two characters and the caper and the love story. And that was also more manageable. But it was always, yeah, it was, I love shows like Shameless, like the US Shameless, and I feel like there's a challenge to walk a balance. Like how do they do it? I don't even think I ever actually figured anything concrete out. I just knew that I wanted to have this breathing room and try to make each thing work. And I knew that, you know, some cable shows had done that, so it must be possible. And then I just kind of tried to trust it and then go with letting it go kind of so far and then bringing it back so that hopefully it's all within, you know. And then I guess there's some things where it clearly is more playful. And that was also to kind of keep a little bit of whimsy in there. And I wanted it to be funny. Hopefully.
No, it definitely, it had moments where it was straight comedy, which was why I think that was the biggest thing that surprised me of my watch, was just how genre fluid it was, you know, and I think being so character driven, it could be whatever it wants to be, which I just think as a writer, oftentimes writers it seems they don't let themselves kind of veer off. And you mentioned earlier that you kind of just let the story kind of become what it needed to be. And I felt that watching it, just, you know, cause I love stuff like that. I love like genre fusion, like, you know, outside of the box stuff. But it's shockingly still really rare, I think, even in the most like experimental guerrilla filmmaking, you know, in the indie world. So yeah, I mean, I just love that I was constantly surprised watching it. Like, oh, this is not, especially, you know, the way the film began. I'm like, oh, okay, all right, this is what I'm getting into. And then it immediately shifts gears, and then it shifts gears again. Yeah, I just really appreciate that element a lot.
I have to say, I loved that too. Part of our programming team, there were a few folks that watched it and were like, I don't know. I mean, there's like a mystery that they're trying to solve, but then they have a threesome. And like in their minds, it had just like jumped from one to the next. And so I was like, let me give this a watch. But it made for a really lush conversation around it. And I appreciated it for that, you know, that like there is, I don't know, typically on a programming side, like there is this urgency to like fit it into something and make it be this thing that you need it to be within your overall festival programming. And you know, you put it really beautifully, Danny. Like, I love that it was genre fluid, as you said, that we couldn't quite put our finger on it in any particular way. And that's what made it so beautiful.
Totally. It felt super punk in a lot of ways. It was just like, it felt like that, yeah, the kind of film that I haven't seen in years that I just missed, honestly. But at the same time, its own thing, you know, just, I've never seen it done in that way before, so.
Well, this is fascinating for me because I haven't really, you know, I haven't heard much feedback from people. I mean, there's no Q&A festivals things anymore, so this is kind of like one of the first. And if you don't get chosen into a festival, no one tells you what they were talking about when they didn't pick your film. So yeah, it's cool to hear it. I mean, I think it's probably maybe slightly less conscious and a little more, like, my background is photography and installation, and I did always put things together that were slightly disparate, and I felt like I got to this place where it hung together. A lot of snapshot type photography with video, and then sometimes some like physical stuff. So maybe it's also kind of an extension of that, and just wanting it to have at least enough connective tissue that you could be kind of swept along. But I mean, anything when you have fluid in your description, like I'm happy to, you know, take that up.
Totally. I didn't realize that it sounds like you're earlier I'm just curious what your trajectory is of the film's completion and release. Have you, because I saw you guys did a couple other streaming festivals. Is this kind of post-COVID, like the first kind of heat of them?
Yeah, there's like several through September and October. I'm not sure what's going to come after that. And I really hope the festivals like tell us, you know, who watched, how many people, if they came maybe from other countries. Some are geo-blocked, some aren't. I always think it's great when they aren't, actually. And I'm just going to, at the moment, obviously, and you know, it makes sense to listen to any offer, but I really don't see a distributor, you know, coming knocking. And so I have some DIY grassroots plans, and of course that just ultimately includes dropping on like iTunes and Google Play and keeping the price down if possible. I'm looking into like how you can keep the price down potentially.
Nice.
But yeah, I just like, I want to keep the rights, and I want to know who's like out there like watching and wanting the film, whose arms it's going into. And we should also though put that the question, like I have some questions for Danny. Yeah.
Oh, please.
Shoot, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I have like quite a few things, and some of them are just like
I have more
classic.
for you too. I was gonna say I that's one.
It's gonna go. Yeah.
I
It's like,
wasn't sure if we were going back and forth there. We should just go down, or however much
Let's
time.
do it. Let's take turns. That sounds
Let's
great.
take
Yeah, let's
turns.
just ding back and forth. Okay.
Yeah. So I was just gonna say that like some of the first things I wrote down were so you know typical. I was like, they're just like sweater and like blue lips, just like very, you know, grabby, like enjoying those kind of relatable. I love that like punk iconography and the style. It's so I craved it for so long, you know, that it's wonderful when you get that and you see that, and like the anyway. So I have kind of a question about you're very self-effacing, or maybe you aren't, but maybe it's this character, Baz. But I noticed like as with you playing that character and being the director, there's a certain kind of humility, I think, that I noticed where you are kind of not hard on the character, but there's like a kind of, people are sometimes a little bit mean to Baz, or like it's not this super heroic like takeover kind of, and I thought that was really interesting. And there's the scene where the character is going like blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
Could you talk about whether that's conscious or how that comes in?
Yeah, I mean that character was definitely, I think this film for sure, more than my other films that have been, I think, more observational, using myself as kind of like a crux, has been more very in my head. So that the character is very drawn from a lot of just a lot of streams of consciousness and experiences. And I think it specifically trying to kind of chart this period of time where I don't know how to describe this aside from just saying that like I felt like I was dealing with 20 different things, you know, both kind of working through psychologically, like a lot of feelings of like self-worth and doubt and imposter syndrome and confidence, and working through all of that, and compounded with, you know, an excess of things that are maybe positive, you know, like attention and alcohol and parties and lights and costumes and colors. And so I wanted to like capture a snapshot of that feeling that happens when your brain kind of fritzes out a little bit, when you kind of just buckle under doing everything constantly all the time, dealing with all this stuff internally, constantly moving externally, and you no longer feel like you're even going through each motion anymore. That's what I was sort of trying to capture. So in that moment where I'm talking to the character Gemini, and it's just explaining this whole story of what this tour that my character has been on, but really it's just all this blur of faces and things and expressions and stimuli, and it all just becomes compounded into mush, basically. That's what I was trying to get at. And that's why the colors were a big part of me, a big part of the makeup of it aesthetically, because I wanted it to feel like it was overwhelming. So trying to make the experience that's happening inside very external and very just unavoidable. But yeah, that character was very, very real to me in a certain point in my life. And I think in a lot of ways, I kind of dealt with a lot of that after doing the film. And there was a kind of a companion album to the whole project that is part of it too. And I think in a lot of ways this year, it's funny that this year followed last year, because I shot the film about 1.5 years ago. And I finished it. I mean, it's a short film, so I did it pretty quickly. But this year, it's funny, like looking back at it, it's like, wow, that really was a document to how just, you know, I can't even think of the word for it, just overwhelmed to the max, just overspilling. And this year has been a lot of getting balance, kind of finding, getting my intention back, you know, all of these things that I think are really healthy long-term. But boy, like looking back at CONDiTiONER, it's like, I was not anywhere near there 2 years ago. So it's an interesting document, personally.
I want to quickly tag another thing on, if that's okay.
Yeah,
Because
sure.
I think the proportions are interesting. Like it gets really uncomfortable, and I felt really sorry, you know, like genuinely I had this like chest squeeze when Baz first came, like kind of woke up in the office, sitting at the office, and was like so lost and at sea. And then there's a feeling, you know, in more traditional, I would say more traditional narrative, that would go for a certain amount of time. And I thought it was so appropriate, you know, because like when you're kind of, things are happening to you, it's not completely under, you know, that's kind of some of the problem, is like it just goes on and keeps going. And I thought that was really immersive, that you chose as a filmmaker to stretch it. And it does oscillate, but it also kind of, that tension was sustained. And I was just like hoping, and I was really happy at the end, you know, that there was a safe harbor. Because
that was an interesting, I'm not a happy ending person. So that was kind of a later choice that I made, of just, because it's funny, I was worried about that specific section that you were mentioning, the office sequence, because I just felt like, I thought it was, I felt like it was almost like a gotcha. Like, you know, half the film is this kind of relationship driven, you know, character piece. And all of a sudden you're just in a daze in an office for 12 minutes straight. So I felt kind of nervous about shooting and packaging that part. And I thought earlier on I was going to cut that part down a lot. But I don't know, it felt right to sort of sit in it and then let the story kind of, it doesn't quite really make sense narratively so much, which was a hard thing for me, because for me it's like, well, okay, this magical drug doesn't really make sense if like you take this pill and it's simulation, but then people from your life are still there. But I just sort of let that go and let it be just cerebral, you know, like what would it feel like? And how could I end it in a way that doesn't have to make sense, but feels right? And it felt right. But that was like one of the last decisions I made, just to have, there's really no explanation. The character finds himself back to setting one, and then sort of just clicks back into place. Like there's really no reason for it. There was no magical deus ex machina. There was no special extra pill. There was just sort of, you know,
surviving
again. Yeah, totally. That means that, thank you for saying that, because it's always kind of been in the back of my mind a little bit. So the people who have seen it, who have responded to that part, has been really surprising.
Well, and I think that there is that, you know, you're like the conductor as a filmmaker, and that there is a nice thing to sort of taking that tension and releasing it at the end, like kind of an exhale. And so I was relieved.
I have actually, speaking of kind of characters and motivations, and I have a question for you on that note. Because I felt like with your film, the cool thing was, I guess I found myself as a writer trying to find if the writer's POV was in the film, you know, and I felt like the protagonist, it could have been the protagonist, which would be the simplest, you know, way to go. But there were so many like super rich characters surrounding him. Basically all the female characters in the film. I felt like there were so many rich characters and characterizations and motivations. And I was wondering, I was really curious as to like what, if any of them were rooted in people you know. I know we mentioned a little bit about this earlier, but specifically those main characters, including his partner in the beginning, who I actually was really surprised when, you know, because at some point I in the very beginning of the film, I thought we could be following either one of them if they were splitting up. And then when we followed him, I was like, oh, okay. You know, you know, it was just like not thrown for a loop, but I was like, okay, like there was actually a moment of, oh, like she's not coming back immediately. Okay, we're gonna lose her now. And then we meet this other character. So I was just curious, specifically, you know, those three main characters, where you found your inspiration for them.
Well, I can just say that like for Nick, the thing I relate to, and I don't really I've never been very good at like it with myself or the world, like distinguishing kind of gender. So I tend to think more in like pure character, and then the vessels are kind of put over top. And I definitely probably relate to Nick the most because it's just, you know, it's really easy to, with heartbreak, it's really easy to kind of lose everything else at the same time. Like, especially if someone's really important to you, it's like, it can kind of rip apart a lot of the fabric.
Right.
And also being kind of slow, like not really, I think this is not particularly untrue of most people. Like obviously movies tend to, you tell a story about something that is worth making a film about generally. But I was interested in the idea that like progress and healing is like kind of actually a lot of failure. That's how I feel about myself. I feel like I'm just like really slow about getting better at things that I want to, internal growth, everything, you know, I'm like, so it was really kind of about how it's like with Nick, he's just really hurt for a really long time. And then the other characters are super feisty. And I thought it was interesting with Lizzie to kind of talk about how somebody who's perceived as really strong can really end up in a vulnerable place, like the same as anyone else. And in fact, it can even be more of a trap because people aren't expecting them to need, you know, have like a special, they think they're so capable that they won't need that attention. And you do see that like with really unexpected people and types of personalities ending up just really kind of compromised and under threat. So that was part of that. And Rena is you know, she's just, I like how she doesn't try to be polite. Like she just doesn't even try to put any time into manners. And that's so refreshing. There's a character that I love watching, Ruth on Ozark. I just love, like I could just make a reel of how she talks. It's like, that's vicariously, like I just get so much out of how she talks to people. Like, what's it called? When you kind of, you take it on as your own like wish fulfillment. Yeah. So
living vicariously.
Yeah, exactly. Like Ruth says all the things I would love to say and the way I'd love to say them sometimes. But yeah, and then I guess technically I also have this love of like some 80s and 90s movies where there's kind of a sweetness to like the parents, and I do like the way, like with the suburban upbringing, a lot of times you have these like parents who kind of, I don't know how much they meant to or just good luck, but like they did kind of support their weirdo kids, let them play drums in the basement and like, and I wanted to kind of do a nod to that. So that's a lot of I think those are a lot of the players.
The roots of it. Yeah, and I really liked how most of your characters just weren't afraid to be, there was like a boldness to even just the way, like, you know, him just peeing on the foreclosure sign, and like it just those little touches of things that are like definitely like in the what's the word for it, like anti-hero kind of category a little bit, you know, but you root for them because they're very real in that way, you know, that makes them more like people that you actually know. There's a realism to it, which I really appreciate.
Well, I mean, I imagine you guys have this too. Like, I think also when you went to a lot of shows or go to a lot of shows, it's like people are peeing everywhere.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of not like, I like his statement that he does it. And then I also think it's part of this idea, like when you hope you're speaking to your audience, that there's also kind of they're getting it, that it's also just in the behavior, totally. The typical no big deal. Of course, that's what he would do. Totally.
Yeah, I love that there was even the inclusion of like the scene with like him in the stall, you know, it's like there were these like little moments of just like, it just made it feel just kind of what Ramona mentioned earlier, that kind of almost documentary feeling where it's so real that you forget their characters, you forget it's fictional, which is kind of I think the coolest marriage of the two. And actually, before I forget this question, I would love to ask you about the first sequence of the film, just making it, because it's like watching it for me. I mean, I'm assuming you shot this, you said you've been working this film for years. I'm assuming this was shot before any of what's going on this year, but it was just like, oh, wow, like this is so viscerally, like, you know, my stomach dumped out because it's just, oh, this is
the protest with like the black bloc getting ass kicked,
and, like, all of that. Like, what was that? I guess could you what was how did you film that? How did you make it feel so visceral and real? Was it complicated? Was it as hard as it looked?
It is. It's tough, and there's an amazing stunt coordinator, Kendo, who came on and had just like incredible team. And Vancouver, you know, we do have really high level performers with a huge service industry doing primetime TV and film. So anyway, I got to say this story though. It's like that day or half day was landed in a heat wave. So everyone was all in black and they're doing these like, you know, just running, like jumping, getting knocked back, all this stuff. And it's like 40 degrees. Well, you know, I don't know if that's Celsius. And then the cameraman, Colin, is like, you know, he's like in there carrying this massive thing, just like drenched. And over, because we had to really try and accumulate a lot of shots to make it dynamic. They had the squid, the mouth, and we had to everything was minimal. So we really had to I was so nervous pulling the trigger for the smoke bombs because I'm like, please look good and just work. Cause we only have a few.
Yeah.
So everything was quite high key, but the stunt people are amazing because everyone else was running and hiding in the school gym. As soon as something was done, they would go and go in the shade. But the stunts are such a posse that they're on the side, kind of kneeling down, watching each other work and being like, yeah. And I was just like, this is some SWAT level, teamwork.
Wow. And when was that?
It was a year and a half. Well, I guess if it's, a year and a half ago-ish.
Okay.
It's a really long blur. I can so relate to CONDiTiONER. That's how my 2 years has been since we, knew we were gonna do this.
I know that's the crazy thing about film is you do it in these vacuums and spend so much time with it and then so much time away from it. And we did the CHS blog the other day and the questions were all like, well, was this film inspired by the pandemic? And well, how did the pandemic affect? And I'm just like, this has not, this pandemic was worlds away from the last time when I inhabited this world. Like, it's so funny. So I bet you're going to definitely get questions about, oh, well, were you inspired, in May? And you're like, no, it's been 10 years.
Yeah, I'll be like, when we made this, I couldn't even spell pandemic. Like,
Right.
it was the days when we could just breathe all over each other and.
Right. But people, it's so funny how people absorb film that way, and they turn to filmmakers and they're like, well, obviously you shot that film, so that's your experience right now, and you're like, well, it takes a long time to, but it's weird how those like themes just become, either they become super relevant again, or you feel so far removed from them. Like for me with CONDiTiONER, it's like the idea of having scenes in nightclubs now just feels like this strange slap in the face to everyone. It's just like, I'm sorry, I didn't know we would lose like parties, and then with you, it's like the reverse. You have the sequences 2 years ago that are like, people are doing it every day now again.
And I think I might update it a little before it goes on iTunes as well. I think I think it's really important to include some, BLM and Black Lives Matter and get a little of that infused. So it's not too late. I can still update.
Do you think you would do that with footage that you just had in the bank, or like, are you okay?
Probably just like trying to find some good, decent footage. That's a challenge, obviously, stylistically. A lot of things are shot in a way that you're like, no, that's not, that's not going to look, but it's a bit of I've always liked like looking for vintage clothes, or I like treasure hunting for things. So, yeah, I feel like it is possible if you keep at it, you can find those little, it's super short, that sequence is actually quite compressed.
Yeah.
So it would just be because I want to honor the work that, and the things that have been, and the awareness that's going on right now. It feels like it's missing, at the moment.
I want to jump in with an audience question from Jim, who says, thank you both for getting your films made and for being a part of the festival. Right now, the world is crazy, as we're discussing. How are you figuring out how to let audiences know about your films? And I think I might add to that, in this landscape, are there new projects that you're also working on concurrently, now that these are sort of out the door and out in the world? So yeah, one part, how are you figuring out how to keep those moving forward and getting them into the hands of the people who need them and want to be experiencing them? And then on the other hand, what are you creating?
I can go first. Yeah, it's crazy because, in 2019, I told myself that 2020 was going to be a big film year. Like I was going to put, because it'd been so music heavy for years, and I'd had a hard time carving out time I did a feature like 3 years ago, and I carved out like months to do it, and then since then I've been kind of on a music roll. But this year was going to be my big film year, and that, I went after all this funding and money, and the project that I wanted to do was actually about a future dystopian police state, which is similar to your experience. It was a script I wrote in 2015 about a version of the present that's war-torn in a police state. It became way too real, and also at the same time impossible to shoot, because like the one thing with COVID is that no matter what you shoot, you can't do groups, you can't do, it was going to really rely on that. So kind of scrap that, and I think for me right now, not necessarily trying to stay away from wanting to do a big feature film project, but what I really would like to do is, I mentioned it earlier, but I've been really kind of fiending to do this web series thing. And I like the idea of a web series because I feel like we talked about distributors and festivals and all these things, and I feel like right now I don't know if I can go back into a cycle just yet of like getting into a feature film that I don't know what the festival circuit's gonna be like. I don't know what, that whole world is. But I feel like with a web series, it's probably a lot harder to monetize, but at least I can control its dissemination, and at least there's it's a little boundless. The hardest thing I'm grappling with right now is how to proceed with it under under the restrictions and what's safe and what's not safe, and can a lot of it be green screen? Like, how could I get around it? So yeah, that's kind of where my head's at. I'm trying to find a way. I'm constantly just strategizing and plotting and trying to see how things look and what other people are doing. I've been doing a lot of music videos over quarantine, so kind of doing some research on each set of like, well, are you guys shooting film projects? How's that going? And kind of collecting people who apparently people's jobs now are being COVID safe practitioners on set. So yeah, just trying to find a way to proceed that's safe and that's ethical, but also we're going to be under these constraints for a long time. So trying to get creative about it. But I think the medium for me is definitely not going to be feature film for a while. I think I'll just get experimental with the format.
Cool. Looking forward.
Thanks.
I kind of oscillate between worrying or being behind or trying to catch up with the different things, because I really want to I really value these selections into the festivals, but I'm sort of like one person, and I am also trying to keep time with writing, because it's a really good time to be developing projects, and writing is of course quite slow to get it worked through. I do like different passes and kind of tear things apart and put them back together, so it can be a little long, and then I'm always trying to figure out like how to market. I feel like just humans, maybe I might try to get a grant to be able to hire a person to do work on marketing and social, because it's this kind of thing. I just pick up my phone and try to keep up, and then I feel bad because I don't feel like that's what it deserves better, and now's the time. So there's like a lot of anxiety in a way around how fast the weeks go, and I would just like eyeballs. Like, I feel like I don't know where people are. I know they're out there. I think the film is fun and interesting. So if people would talked about it, I think word of mouth is like a really real, really valuable thing. And I just don't really know how to make anything like this. Will be a big experiment, and I hope that I can take what I'm learning and the kind of tricks and the hacks to apply to new projects that I'm super excited about. And maybe it'll just be a little easier, because it's also it's a shifting landscape, but also it's always been difficult, and now that there's so much online, there's this expression, about you have to be kind of louder and noisier and try to rise above it, but with no dollars to do that. If anybody wants to tell me how to reach people, I just try to be super flexible. Like, sometimes festivals have asked, do you want it to be able to be like a 7-day rental? And I'll be like, I'd love it to be as long of a rental as it can be, because people need to fit it in. And yeah, I would love the handbook on this. And then one thing I could, I have a lot of projects, but one that I think is really exciting is it's based on a Sunburst Award long-listed book by a really great Montreal writer named Sujay Sokal, and it's called Cycling to Asylum. And it used to be a few years back much more of a sci-fi. It's about like the US becoming very right-wing. I think I would call it a drama now, but essentially it's like a dystopian border run with a really young couple who are very in love, and they have some sort of teenage children, and they're activists in this increasingly hostile environment in the States. And then a few things happen that really worsen, and one of the parents has a kind of more militant secret past, and it becomes really a high risk thing for them to be there. And they decide to go on they basically pitch the kids that they're going to do a bicycle tour. And I love cycling. And
spoilers though.
No spoilers, yeah. You can go look it up. It's called Cycling to Asylum. And so it's an adaptation of this. And then the kids have to kind of get their head around the fact that what this trip actually is a kind of really life or death attempt to escape to Canada.
Nice.
And we're
amazing.
like, now we are kind of like potentially a bit of a safer haven.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that would be really, that's something I really, I'm excited about, like the bicycling. I think there's so much activism in like cycling and bicycle culture. So, and I haven't really seen that.
Yeah, I haven't either. There's
coming
time.
up.
Yeah, I think there's so much untapped potential there.
Thank you. You'll sign up.
For
well,
sure.
I think that's really cool.
Thank you.
I wanna reiterate in sort of bringing us to a close, because we've been chatting for over an hour. Can you believe it?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone.
It's been amazing, but I want to say to your point, SB, the first thing that came to mind for me was also the word of mouth. If folks who are having an opportunity to tune into these programs are liking what you see, the best thing that you can do to support these artists is to go and tell your 5 favorite people who trust your opinion. Tell them to tune in and tell them to tell their friends, because no matter how many dollars we sink into these marketing machines, like, they are not structured to benefit us. And like, we trust the people that we trust for a reason. So I really can't promote word of mouth highly enough. It really, like, the audience plays such a huge role in the dissemination of good work in the world. So just want to put that out there. Go tell everybody you know and love. And also, in the meantime, throughout local sightings, you can vote for your Audience Choice Awards. So as an audience member, and actually filmmakers too, why not vote for your film? Get it in there. But you have an opportunity to vote for your favorite feature and your favorite short. And then they will have an opportunity, the winners will have an opportunity to be featured at Northwest Film Forum for a run in the future. And obviously we don't know if that's going to be online or in person just yet. But that's an opportunity that we want to be able to offer to continue extending the viewership of these works and continue getting them out there. So
I hope I win.
I'm gonna end on that. What's that?
I hope I win. I hope Fall Back Down wins.
I know, I'll be voting best feature.
Yeah.
Awesome. You got some fans already. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you panelists. Thank you audience for tuning in. Both Fall Back Down and CONDiTiONER will continue to be screened 24 hours a day through September 27th at the end of the festival. And then do join us on the 27th for a closing ceremony, a celebration of our 25th anniversary. I am the host, so come and check that out.
Nice.
And yeah, we'll see y'all soon.
Happy anniversary.
Yeah, happy anniversary.
Thank you. We're 25. We're 25.
Yeah.
Nice.
Amazing. Anyway.